introducing to you our new budget and research manager. For those of you that don't know, Joe Pizzillo is retiring at the end of this month. It's been expected for quite some time. Since I've started with Goodyear, he's been pretty well dialing this date in. And so we had the opportunity to go through a recruitment process to bring in Joe's successor and have 1 month overlap so that some of the data that Joe works with is able to be assimilated. And with that, I would like to introduce Terry Canada. Terry comes to us from the city of Peoria, where she's spent the last 10 years of her career. 8 of those have been in the budget office. The city of Peoria has one of the most respected budget processes in the state of Arizona. When checking with the references, the budget director in Peoria gave a lot of credit to where they are today to Terry, and I thought that spoke very highly of her. Terry also, before that, had some experience in local and county government. And Terry's also going to pass out some of the notes that I'm going to be discussing with you this evening. But I thought since she was here, I would introduce her to you, so if you see her around, you'll know who it is. And as we go through the process, the budget process this year, Terry will take a lead role in presenting the budget to you after we've had the council advance. Up till that point in time, I will be making a number of presentations to the city council. This presentation is the first of a number of presentations, and the goal that I'd like to accomplish tonight is to update you on what staff is doing in the budget process, update you a little bit on the revenues, but also what the whole budget schedule that we're planning on for this year. I will take questions as we go throughout this process or at the end if you have any questions, whatever works for you. Tonight is the first of what we anticipate to be approximately 5, call them mini work sessions with the City Council. And what we would like to do in these work sessions is go over the financial status and give you a lot of the information that you've been asking for, that you've been reading about in other communities, where are we, and that type, and make this as interactive a process as we can as we're putting the budget together. In doing that, this first session tonight is kind of review the schedule as well as update you on the revenues. You'll recall in November we came before you and gave you an update of where the revenues are, and tonight we're going to update that a little bit for 3 months more data. The second session, at the request of one of you, is to give you a status of the current budget and expenditures. We programmed a budget this year. How are we coming on that budget through the first 6 months of the year? And where do we see potential savings and that type of thing? Then the third session, we're going to start to put that together and give you a picture of what we see the budget looking like from a revenue perspective, not necessarily completely from a priorities perspective at that time, because you will, of course, not have had a lot of input on the priorities by that point in time. But with the revenue estimates, we can pretty much give you a picture of dollars, what the budget will look like. The fourth session, we're going to start to focus on the one-time and capital improvement plan portions of the budget. And this is the revenues allocated to the capital improvements plan as well as one-time costs, how that compares to what we've done in the prior years, and what we envision in the upcoming budget. Then in the fifth session, we're going to try to bring all of that back together for you and kind of recap with more information that we have available where we are in the budget process and how that's fitting together and what it's looking like. And that should take us up to the City Council advance, where we're going to be really discussing what the council priorities are as we're going through the budget process and the issues within the budget process that are important to each of you and to you as a collective body.
Or you can use Elmo, this is the impact fee.
Yes, I'm going to use Elmo for a few charts if Eddie or Jeff wouldn't mind having that available for us. I'm melting.
That's a flattering picture. Are we supposed to be following along with what you handed out?
I went through the first 3 pages of that very, very quickly, and this wasn't intended to be that formal. I just wanted to give you an outline of what I've talked about, and I had a request today from one of the reporters that wanted a handout, so this is intended to give something that they can take home of what it was we talked about a little bit too. After the council advance, we'll spend a couple of weeks in the finance department and budget office and city manager's office putting your input together with what we've already done and bring back then the balanced budget for the city council to review starting in mid-April. And that's where the discussions will be a lot more specific on how is this funded, where does that come in, what are the assumptions and so forth, although I think a lot of the assumptions for financing, thank you Eddie, will take place at that point in time. In May, we'll present the City Council the tentative budget for adoption. The tentative budget, of course, is the first adoption that takes place in the budget process under Arizona state law. The final budget then will be adopted in June. We'll present that. Generally, the final budget does not have material changes from the tentative budget, but allows for adjustments for changes in estimates or actual carryover type projects. But we really like to have all of the policy decisions wrapped up within the tentative budget at that time, if that's at all possible. Yes, sir.
Question on it. Before we begin this, will we have in our hands where we are on this 2007-2008 budget? What have been our expenditures? Where do we stand on that up to this point?
Yes.
Because we should have that before we start on this.
Yes. And that is the work session that we're planning for next week, that we're going to give you a status report on all of the expenditures, how they're coming. We're going to look most closely at the operating expenditures, the capital expenditures, and the CIP. If a project is running slower than what was designed, it might still be earmarked for that project, and so it really becomes a fixed dollar amount, considerably more than the operating expenditures and certain other one-time costs. So we'll present that to you next week and give you some information on that. Any other questions about that part of the process?
We'll have it several days beforehand, doesn't it? Time to study it.
We'll probably present it to you next week, but you'll have plenty of time to study it and ask questions between then and April when we present the whole budget. We will not ask you for any action out of that, as we're not asking for action tonight. This is more to make sure, we're giving you the information you need in this process.
We need that before we
Absolutely.
start on the initial budget process for next year.
Okay. The final step in the process then will be adoption of the property tax levy, and that is scheduled for the first meeting in July, which I think on the budget calendar is it?
July 14th.
Is it? Okay. I had thought it might be earlier than that, but whatever the council meeting is in July, that's when we will schedule that adoption. This schedule is very consistent as it relates to the formal council action, is quite consistent with the budget process that we've had in prior years. I'm going to slide this across just for the benefit of those in the audience that don't have a copy of this. This is a preliminary budget forecast update. This is the revenue estimates, and I want to update you from our discussion that we had in November of how we're coming on the revenues. and we take this history back into the fiscal year 05-06 budget. This schedule, by the way, is primarily general fund revenues. Actually, it is just general fund revenues, which is the primary focus. We have left the enterprise funds off on that. I can discuss those globally, but they're coming in at or above budget, especially in the water and sewer utilities. In the 2005-2006 fiscal year, the total operating revenues within the budget, actually it's the total general fund revenues of about $62 million. That number does include the construction sales tax that was included as part of this local sales tax number. So this local sales tax number is all local sales tax, city sales tax. It includes the operating as well as the construction. For 2006-2007, that number increased to approximately $46 million for the sales tax and $80 million in the total operating revenues in the general fund. For those of you that will take this schedule back and compare it to your audited financial statements that were presented a couple of months ago, you'll notice that that number is actually $91,200,000 and some thousand. The difference between those two numbers represents reimbursements that we received on the Cotton Lane Bridge from the Newland companies that for this purpose I thought just distorted the comparability of these numbers as we went through the process. The third column is the adopted budget, the revenue estimates for the adopted budget for the current fiscal year. And those total $89.5 million, with the sales tax originally estimated at about $52 million. The fourth column then represents the forecast that we presented to you in November, where we adjusted the sales tax at that time to $44 million. When we did that adjustment, as you recall in the discussion, we talked about two elements of the construction sales tax at that time. The construction element we left in the budget at approximately $21 million, and the non-construction we had in at $23 million, and that was a reduction of $7 million from our original estimates. So that total got us to about $44 million in sales tax, and that was based on data through the month of, I believe it was the month of September, which is actually sales of August, not very much data into this fiscal year. And the total at that time then we estimated about $81.1 million for the general fund. The February data includes December. Yes,
just a clarifying question. When you're talking about the November forecast and the February forecast, you're referring to budget for the FY 07-08.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Thank
so
you.
You're talking about meeting those numbers in the third column in those.
Yes.
Okay.
So that is a comparison to the third column. That's correct. And the month is the month that we discussed it with you, as opposed to any time frame of the actual transactions. The current forecast that we're providing you has reduced the sales tax number down to approximately $39 million. What's happened, what we talked about in the construction sales tax, we were trending at the time at about $15 million, and actually that trending is continuing. It's actually about $16 million at this point for this year. We were expecting some big projects to come along, and they still may come along. But for estimating and timing between fiscal years, and that's what we're talking about, how are some of these going to flow through? And at this purpose, or at this point in time, we really haven't seen the trends changing enough to warrant using the higher number that we estimated when we were here in November. So we've adjusted that number down. We have not adjusted the other sales tax items as, well, we did a couple $100,000, but basically have left those the same from that presentation, as those trends have not changed from that discussion. I want to go over with you again, because this is very confusing, what this includes as far as information. This includes sales tax information we receive from the state through December, which would be sales tax returns filed by businesses in the month of December and paid for in the month of December, which means November sales. So you might get a little of the Christmas holiday in there. You did not get all of the new store openings that happened in that time frame for the Christmas holiday. That information still is not available. It's a number I've been asked for several times, and I cannot provide it at this point in time.
But you can in March, is that correct?
I should know in in a few weeks, hopefully 2 to 3 weeks, we should know those numbers and how they compared to the prior year and see what different trends are taking place at that point in time. And that'll only be 1 month data of those new stores, but it'll be a Christmas month, which obviously is a very big month.
Well, according to the real.
Well, big is comparison to prior years as everything that you're reading, but it's still, compared to the 12 months, it's the largest month for a lot in the retail.
Larry, are you comfortable with state shared revenues, that projection? In view of what the doom and gloom that the state is predicting?
That's a very good question. In this number, we have looked at that number in the context of comparison to what's happening at this point in time. We're constantly monitoring it to see if that's going down a little bit. But I think that the revenue estimates used to determine that number, which is only the state sales tax portion, not all of this is sales tax. Some of this is income tax, which is dead on because that's actually 2 years ago income tax. The sales tax, there are 3 components of this: sales tax, income tax. No, in the general fund there would be 2 components, sales tax and income tax. So it'd be the sales tax component that is down. We're showing that down actually from our estimates by about this $400,000. All of that is sales tax. We're keeping to watch the monthly reports as we're getting them. We're monitoring the state on that. If there is a variation on that number in dollars, that is not nearly as significant as we're talking on our local sales tax dollars. That's where the big dollars are.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Our building and zoning fees continue at a pretty good pace. A lot of large commercial projects are coming in, and so they're actually coming in a little bit higher than what we projected in the budget. You'll notice for next year, though, and I'll go through next year on all of these columns, but next year we're projecting that to slow down a little bit based on a number of the commercial projects permitting early but building over a longer period of time. And we're working with the community development staff to obtain those estimates. Appreciate their help on that. And so the net sum of this is that from November until now, the reduction in our total general fund revenues that we're estimating is about a $3 million reduction, which brings us to a total of about $12 million from the time, or from the adopted budget. We'll talk more next week as we go through the process. All of that $12 million does not have to be absorbed by the if you will, the contingency fund, because there is an amount of money that we just will not spend in our budget process.
What is in the rainy day fund?
$20 million is what the City Council has established in there.
Okay.
But this is not going to reduce it by $12 million because of expenditures that will come under budget. In the past, we've had a surplus that we've been able to roll over to the next year. This year, we may not have a surplus over and above the $20 million. I mean, let me clarify that. We may not have a surplus above the $20 million, but I'm expecting a considerably lower number that we would have to reduce that. if we have to reduce that 20 million at all this year. And that's part of where we will constantly be working with you to provide you updates on how that is coming.
Would you say that that cushion puts us in better shape than many other communities?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it puts us in extremely good position to be able to get through.
That's a good word.
Well, it puts us in a good position to get through this fiscal year. It doesn't mean that we don't have to make some difficult decisions with a slowdown in revenues. Obviously, we have to. But we don't have to make them as quickly as we otherwise might have to make them. Now, I don't want that interpreted that we're sitting on our hands waiting for the end of the year to see what's happening, because that is not what's happening right now. The directors have met each of the last 2 weeks for several hours at a time, and the one thing that we are doing internally is reviewing the budget for this year, as well as new costs that we're expecting for next year, to try to find ways internally to absorb added costs that we can expect in this budget process. And there will not be new revenues to absorb these costs.
Have you recommended a figure, percentage?
At this point in time, what we're looking at as a percentage of costs that we need to try to absorb is about 10%. But there's a lot of dialogue and work that has to take place on that number. I think that number itself will go down, but it won't go down to 1%. It'll go down maybe as much as in half. But what we're trying to do is to find internal ways that we can accomplish absorbing those costs.
Thank you, sir.
And a lot of people are doing a lot of work on that, and I wanted you aware of that. It is not merely just the budget office, just the city manager's office, but it's every director in this organization is a part of it. Okay.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah. So how did we get our revenue estimates for next year? We are expecting, as you can see, a decrease in the construction sales tax. You actually can't see the breakdown. A decrease in the construction sales tax and a modest increase in the retail, assuming with new commercial coming in. By modest, I want to say it was in the area of about 5% in the non-construction area. So that's what we're estimating right now today. Yes, sir.
That sales tax, can you provide a breakdown to us?
Absolutely. Yes,
I'd like
we
to-
do have
I'd like
that.
to see that for all the data that you show on here. I'd like to see the breakdown on the 4, 5, or 6 categories that we're
Okay.
talking about lumping it in. I'm curious.
Yes, be happy to do that. The state shared revenues, we really have to watch that number closely. This is general fund only. This does not include the HERF revenues, which we are anticipating a reduction in the HERF or a break even as the scenarios that we're expecting in there with everything that's happening at the state level. I guess I'm saying as we forecast. I'm not editorializing on various legislative issues, which is a whole nother issue, but just trying to be practical.
Assuming that nothing changes in the legislature, isn't that number a little inflated, or is that?
The state income tax is already calculated because it's hard and fast numbers. Assuming no change in the legislature, there would be an increase in the state income tax because we lag by about 2 years on that. So that's in the books and collected. That's a big assumption, though. And this number will have to be monitored, and I think that's what your point is. And I agree with that we're constantly watching what's going on at the Capitol that can impact these numbers. Building and zoning fees, as we indicated, that is a result of analysis done by the Community Development Department, and as further data becomes available, I'm sure they would update it. Vice Mayor Antoniak looks like I confused him.
I think you
on
lost
some-
me.
Okay.
Trying to understand how there's an $840 million to $1.4 billion number that's running around down there at the Capitol right now.
Okay?
And we're still showing an increase. I'm stuck where Frank asked the question here.
Okay, I'm going to...
So,
Me too.
I'm
I'm
stuck.
going to give a broad, if you'll accept this as a broad
Potential.
picture of this and not very specific, because I'd have to go to JLBC to get the very specific numbers, but a concept here. When the state adopted their budget, they adopted a budget that assumed revenue growth at a fairly high level. In fact, at economic summit that I attended with various budget officials a few months ago, a gentleman from the JLBC was present, and their forecasts at the time that the budget was adopted, their forecasts and recommendation were to assume a growth in revenues of about 3%. The adopted budget assumed revenues at about 7%. And so they had that 4% already to hit, as well as that the 3% was optimistic, and in some cases was actually showing a decline or was pretty much holding steady. So when you're talking about it, in many respects, that number can compare to this 12 million as we're showing it, going from your original estimate down to a revised estimate. And I think when you're looking at the state level, it's that type of a context that they're doing. The state does not have reserve funds that they're able to deal with in this process, and that's where the numbers get considerably larger also. Now, I respect, with that having been said, I'm telling you that this is our estimate as of today on that, and it will be fluid as we go through this process. It has to be fluid through this process for the very reasons you're talking about. There is considerable activity that will take place at the Capitol between now and the time we adopt the budget that could have an impact on our budget, and we intend to monitor that to keep it there. Okay.
So that money is there. It's just a matter of, that's not counted in their budget. That money is there because it was collected 2 years ago.
The income tax was collected 2 years ago. That doesn't mean that the state legislature in this year would not reduce that level, but it was collected, so the amount is calculable today. It's not like the sales tax where you're estimating future transactions.
Right.
When they adopt the budget, that number will be a very fixed number at that point in time. The state income tax always, it's called urban sharing, but that one has always been calculated and close. The sales tax, of course, is where you get into the best estimates of a number of economists, and that's a much more fluid process throughout the whole system. How is the economy reacting and so forth.
All right. What effect is the current economic situation going to have on our CIP project?
That's a good question. I'll give you a generic answer now, and then 2 weeks from now, we're hoping to discuss that a little further. With the reduction in our sales tax revenues and a reduction in our residential building permits and our resulting development impact fees collected, the monies available for the capital improvements project have decreased significantly. In fact, as I recall, overall, I'm going to say about in half for the next 5 years.
I'm particularly interested in the city center project.
The specific projects in that are being worked through the CIP process, and there's a very high priority to try to maintain that project as we go out.
Online?
And, yeah, to keep that one as close to on track as can be. But all of this is a balance with all of the projects within the CIP, and the CIP committee is working on that allocation of those resources and have been working on it for a period of time and will continue. But it's a prioritization process, and it's a fitting the projects in with the money and making sure that the funds are available at the time they're needed. some of the variables that changed, and we did talk about this a bit in November, not only does the construction sales tax go down as we receive less revenues, but with that also there's less assessed valuation growth because new houses aren't being built. And so it hits us a second time. And you actually see it more on the secondary assessed valuation growth because the leverage involved, for every dollar in debt service, we can fund a $10 project. So you can see those numbers get pretty big as we're going through this process. But we will discuss that considerably more in a couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you so much.
With that, I have a number of charts that I attached to this, but they really kind of graphically show some of what I've talked about. And so I want to leave some time for the next discussion on the development impact fees if I can.
Let's go around real quick on comments and questions, though.
All right.
Okay.
No, I'll be waiting for 2 weeks to see what's going on.
And I'm just concerned because we had our Budget and Finance Subcommittee meeting last week for the RPTA, Valley Metro, and the way the income is coming off of receipts and taxes for the on Proposition 400, that has set the RPTA process back 1 year. So we're going to be a year behind on everything. So I know the state taxes and income that go to RPTA have dropped to the point where we have used up anything that we had in our contingency funds, and we are now on a level, so pretty much an even keel. So this is putting everything back a year. Mm-hmm. So light rail, buses, everything is set back for 1 year. So it concerns me what happens at the state level and how, if it impacted RPTA, how that will impact us as a city. So I think we need to watch that very closely.
Okay, understood, and I agree.
Vice Mayor?
Just a tough decision coming. It's what I sense right now is there's going to be a lot of hard decisions at the management level in the city and a lot of hard decisions here, and an open and hopefully very fruitful dialogue about our priorities as they exist in the next 3 to 5 years, from what we're hearing from all the economists at various things we go to and various things you all attend. And what what Frank talked about just a moment ago, I'm seeing on a business level, and so definitely, being interesting. I think this will probably be our most challenging year financially that we've faced probably since mid-90s here.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Lord?
Just going to all have to work together because we have some tough decisions, and not each of us are going to like to make those decisions, or maybe one of our favorites will have to be delayed, but we have to be responsible to our citizens.
Councilmember Susan?
I think we all have concerns, and I think the financial director can lead us through this term well. He's well qualified. I know he's not going to be able to wave the magic wand to get the more tax dollars in here, but I'm sure that I like what you said earlier about us being in better shape than most communities, and that's a comfort thing to me. But here again, we have to proceed with caution and not, pat ourselves on the backs and gloat over the situation that we're in. So, but thank you very much for your input. Appreciate it very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Larry, I'm assuming that if we budgeted $89 million, then our expenses are planned for about that region. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And we're going to come in around 77 in revenue, so there's a differential of 12. And that's 07, 08.
That is correct.
In the next several months, we're going to be talking 08, 09.
Yes.
Correct? What's the staff doing right now to cut that differential? How are you cutting costs now to put us in a better situation?
Okay.
or not as bad situation come July of this year?
That is, as I discussed, all of the directors are working right now carefully analyzing all budgets to see how cost can be
Okay,
absorbed.
is there any estimate of how you're going to be able to cut that differential from 12 to what?
Well, historically, to give you, not all of this can do it, but historically, for the last 2 years, our operating budget compared to our actual, there's been a $7.5 million surplus each year. Okay? This year, we're tracking for similar to maybe a little better. So some of that is looking at the budget very closely at what we have today to see what resources we can squeeze out of today. And all of us are working, at this point, do we have a very specific that talks about we're going to do this program today? That's what we're working on, is to get consensus on what those are. But as a specific one, I can't say we're going to do anything at this point in time because we're really trying to look within and to make sure that our cost numbers are good as we're going forward.
So we got to move from conceptual cuts to practical, real cuts now.
Yes.
To reduce that differential. The big expense in O&M is always people.
Yes.
I mean, it's so significant. And I guess my only concern is that, and I'm hearing from other cities, that they are worried about people, and we are too. And I think we definitely want to make sure that no one gets eliminated, no one gets cut. Those people on board today are going to work next year too. But that may mean that we're going to have to reduce what we want to do in acquisitions, and that may mean we may want to have to reduce what we were going to do in pay increases and merit pay. So, but the primary objective is to protect the people. Those out in the street.
I would agree, and that has been an underlying assumption in all of the dialogue that we have had, but beyond that, everything is really on the table in these discussions.
I guess even to the point where you might have to freeze hiring for a temporary period of time.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, let's.
Following on what you said, Jim, the differential then, the delta is probably $6 to $5.5 million. Is what you're.
I think we're going to squeeze it
12.
to.
12.
Yeah. I think that with some of the things that we have, it's probably half that.
Okay.
Right now, we're using a number of about $7.5 million that we're trying to squeeze out right now. But that's based on a number of assumptions, and we have to fine-tune that number, and I think you're pretty close.
But we'll know more in 2.5, 3 weeks.
As we're going through this process, this will be a process that'll be evolving leading up to the council advance, and that's why we're coming each week, try to keep a brief presentation. There's a lot of other information you're going to be receiving in this time frame, but each time I want to be here so that we can give you an update of what we're doing.
Okay. We got. I don't have much time for the next part, Larry. So if you could move quickly.
I'm asking Tracy DeSoma to update you on the development impact fees. Tracy.
Thank you. Mayor, council, and members, Mayor Kavanaugh, members of the council. The purpose of this meeting tonight is to update you on the development impact fee study. This is the phase 2 of the EDU study that we started in February of last year. This will rework the current development impact fees. Phase 2 is nearing completion, and staff has been reviewing an initial draft of the development impact fee study. It also includes an infrastructure improvement plan. The draft report will be forwarded to council prior to release to the development community so that you'll all have a couple days notice before it gets to the development community. On February 26th, we plan to meet with the development community to present the report and solicit their feedback. On March 3rd, staff will request that council approve a notice of intent to adjust the current development impact fees. and to adopt an infrastructure improvement plan. This begins the legal process for the development impact fee study. On May 19th, we are proposing a public hearing to be held to discuss the infrastructure improvements plan and the development impact fee study. This will be a chance for the stakeholders to discuss what they would like with you. This is a public hearing process. On June 23rd, if all goes well, we'll ask Council to consider the adoption of the proposed impact fees with an implementation date of September 8th. That's it.
Good.
Questions?
Vice Mayor?
Baseline data as you're going through this, just a question I'll be asking, maybe you don't have to answer it now, but hopefully you're questioning the consultant on their baseline data and what the age of it is. I mean, we're seeing such, just based on the conversation we had from November till now, we're seeing such differentials that hopefully that's being taken into consideration and you're vetting that in your department and discussing that.
It is.
Okay.
Just a conceptual question again. Who is the consultant? Okay, that's what I thought. Just to ask if you could do this. Yes. Now,
Tischler Weiss is the consultant that's conducting the development impact fee study.
okay. She here?
No.
Oh. I didn't think you were. I wondered why you were covering your face. Okay. On CFDs, we're concerned about going to special assessments plus GO bonds. So people in Australia Mountain Ranch, the new folks coming in, and people down in Sonora Valley, they're going to be paying very hefty CFDs. Can we ask our consultant that if they could consider that as certainly something that I know I personally don't want to see happen, can they consider that in their analysis of what the development fees should be? In other words, what part of that could be picked up by development fees versus hitting the people with a GO bond and a special assessment, which we're worried about being $5 or $6 $100, which is absolutely horrible in my mind. And that doesn't even include your real property taxes. That's a different thing, right?
Correct.
So how can this consultant incorporate that reality into their analysis of what our development impact fee should be? Can we do that?
That's a good question. I'm going to defer to Larry.
Very complex question from the standpoint that the statutes are very specific that we cannot levy an impact fee on infrastructure financed by a CFD. And I think what your question is yes, but can we reduce the infrastructure financed by the CFD and include those in the impact fee?
I think it should be considered.
Yes. And it hasn't been literally to reduce planned infrastructure to be financed in the CFD has really not been built into this at this point in time in the model. I think that as we go through this process, because we're as close with a draft report as we are, we should review that with you when this is presented in some work sessions, and if at that point we will discuss it with the consultant, but I really think that to do that it's going to create a very complex blend of these. So we'll take your notes and definitely follow up on it, if I can leave it at that.
During presentation, as I assume you plan on the compare and contrast to neighboring communities as well.
That is correct. That will be a part of the presentation to you, I think even on the first meeting, which is just presenting it out there. And it's included in the report also, I believe.
Not to give away the fun of the question I'm contemplating, as I'm thinking that is this a time period in which we should be more competitive versus other things? you don't have, that's not a question now, it's just a question I'm asking myself going into this.
I think you're asking a good question that the city council can discuss as you see these presentations and as we get to that part of the process.
Okay, thank you. Got a meeting in 8 minutes, is that correct? Okay, this meeting is adjourned.